So this week in class in DCM, we watched For the Life of the World, Letters to the Exiles, which was a really interesting piece of a video series that a guy named Evan is doing. So today I'm going to talk about several of the things that he touched on, some of them that made a memorable difference to me, and some new stuff I learned, some stuff that got reinforced to me, and then just some final thoughts on the video. So first I'm going to talk about three things that I learned from this video. And the first is how people respond to culture, which I found really interesting. Um, he's on the phone with a woman in the beginning of the video, and they're talking about culture, and she says that there are three ways that people respond to culture. The first one being duck and cover, or fortification, which basically is where we try to hide from secular ideas. We try to hide from what's going on in the world. We just want to duck and cover. We just want to run away, which I guess could be slightly paired with the fight or flight response. That would be the flight response. We want to separate ourselves from anything that we would think is not Christian-like or not of God. The next response that we as Christians typically can have to culture is the domination aspect. So this is the fight side of the fight or flight response. And these are your people that they do partake in culture, but as the video likes to say, they have contempt for it. They participate, but they have hatred for it. They're very judgmental. They just want to fight against what's happening in culture. An example that this reminded me of is just thinking of maybe your grandparents, or I like to think of maybe an older member of society as someone who definitely would be what you would call a culture warrior, someone who's going to look at, maybe music that you're listening to or other secular ideas that are happening and want to judge those. So the last way that we as Christians respond to culture would be the accommodationist aspect. So that's your people that they partake in culture and they try to accommodate it. They basically try to exist with it. They try to accommodate secular ideas along with their spiritual ideas. This is kind of like the book that we read that talks about dualism, and this is definitely what I would say is the majority of Christians' response to culture. Those that let it exist and partake in it and even enjoy aspects of it, but they know in their mind that it isn't spiritual, that it isn't of God, that it isn't something that God wants us partaking in. And so that's the accommodationist aspect. So that was definitely a new idea to me. I was not familiar with breaking down the way that we respond to culture in that way, but I thought it was a really good one. I think that's definitely a really good way to portray how we as Christians do respond to culture, whether it's fortification, domination, or accommodation. All three of those ways can even be blended. A person can have all three of those responses to different parts of culture, but I really liked the way that that was broken down in the video. So another thing that I learned from the video is that it takes a full generation to change culture, to have a change in the mindset of how we think. And the Bible lays that out as 70 years, which is also something that the video talked about, and that was really interesting to me. Did not realize it took that long to fully change the mindset of people, but I guess that makes sense because you think of each generation being unique to each other. You think of, your grandparents' generation having a very similar mindset about things in the world. You think about the younger generation, we millennials, typically being regarded as maybe less respectful, definitely less spiritual. I feel like maybe religion might be on the decline. Just things that I think that I see in the world. But yeah, it was interesting to see that it takes a full generation to have a culture change, and each generation needs to work to maybe change the culture for the next one. When Evan is standing there with his friend and they're clearing the field, and his friend talks about doing work that maybe a future generation will reap the rewards of rather than you yourself reaping the rewards or sowing the harvest. That's something that we as Christians can definitely find in ourselves to do and need to find in ourselves to do, is to be okay with doing work for future generations. And so that was a new idea to me, is that it takes a full generation to change culture. So the third thing that I learned from the video and from Evan is a new word, oikonomia, which is, it means stewardship or house management. And that was a really interesting way that his friend put basically what God's plan was. Basically, Evan explained that oikonomia is like God's bigger plan, and that oikonomia can be broken down into separate economies, and that each economy is maybe a different aspect of our life, like school or work or anything that we're doing, and we are called to basically thrive in our own economies. So the economies are of the people, and the economies make up oikonomia, which is God's bigger plan. And I thought that was a really cool thing. That's something that I hadn't heard before. I wasn't familiar with that word. I also thought it was cool how he likened the economies to basically maybe a symphony playing together or a musical song. Each instrument is played individually. Each aspect of our life, while it may kind of relate to another aspect of our life, they're all different. They're all done in a different way. They all require different mindsets. Some of them can be played by some people. Some of them can be played by others. And it was really cool to see how he related all of those coming together as being God's great plan. So next I'm going to talk about two things that maybe I already knew, but were reinforced by the video. And the first one is something that Evan opens up the video with, how he talks about that we are not of this world, but rather we are just in it. And that's how the Bible calls us to be, and that's how we were created. And a lot of people maybe don't get that. We get caught up in culture wars and politics, and we just get really caught up in this world when we really aren't of this world. And he goes on to talk with his friend Amy about what this means. That's really the subject of the whole video, what our purpose is and how that relates to God's bigger picture. So the second thing that I maybe already knew but was reinforced or worded in a different way in this video that really made it cool, and this is probably maybe what I thought was the coolest part of the entire video, was when Evan talks about that every single thing that comes from God is a gift, whether that was light or darkness or the heavens, the earth, the animals, everything was a gift from God, and it was meant to be opened by us, and that we were a gift. We were the greatest gift, and that he gave us the world to explore it and all those things. And then the tree, the fruit of knowledge, that was not a gift, but we took it anyways because that was our human nature. And then we go on, basically, at the point of eating the apple, of eating the fruit of knowledge, we forgot some of these things. We forgot what the gifts were, and we lost sight of things, and that was when death and darkness, started to become really prevalent. And then finally God sent us the last gift, Jesus Christ, who came and, basically gave us our salvation and gave us a way out of the darkness and out of death and out of hell. He brought us full circle, and so that's our biggest gift, is that. And speaking of gifts, that kind of brings us to our final question of this video, which basically talks about why a Chinese lantern is a good metaphor for life. And a Chinese lantern, basically he words it, is, it's got a bamboo frame, and it's, some sort of cloth that makes up the shell, and fire, and it's made of earthly things, and then we release it skyward, we release it heavenward. And that's a metaphor for our gifts that we're given, and our talents, and things that we make in this earth. Everything we do in this earth and that we make in this earth is of this earth. And so what that means is, when we're functioning in our economies, when we are, fulfilling, God's oikonomia, we need to remember that each one of those economies needs to be pointed towards oikonomia. It needs to be pointed towards God's bigger plan. It needs to be pointed heavenward, just like every single Chinese lantern that is made, that is successful, ends up finding its way into the sky, going heavenward. You can make a Chinese lantern, but if it's never released, it's not successful. And same with, the things that we do on this earth. If we are not successful in our endeavors with pointing them towards God, we aren't having success in them. Our economies and our different things that we do in life, they haven't found that success in God. So in conclusion, I thought that Evan's video was very informative. It had some really interesting ideas, some things that I'd really never heard before, just a very interesting way of wording some stuff, and I felt like I gained a lot of understanding from some of the things that he said, and I will definitely be looking into the whole series. I believe I saw on his website it's a 7-part series, so I will definitely be attempting to track down all parts. I don't know if you have to pay for it or what that is, but I will be interested in watching all of them, so I hope this answers all the questions, and thank you, Professor Newman, for allowing us to do maybe a video over a paper, because this was quite a bit more interesting and felt like a good assignment. So thank you, and hope this does well for you.